Mercy Whitmore stood in the middle of the dusty market square, her worn black dress fluttering in the light morning breeze. The sound of silver coins clinking in her hand echoed louder than the bustling town around her. 10 children, 10 emaciated, starving souls, stood in front of her, their hollow eyes reflecting months of neglect and abuse. Mercy's hands, though weathered and calloused from years of hard labor, shook slightly as she counted the silver. But this wasn't just a transaction. It was the start of something bigger, something that would shock this frontier town to its core. Tobias Crow, the man who owned these children, stood off to the side, chewing on a piece of tobacco, and watching her with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. He had been selling these children as if they were cattle, their lives measured by a few coins, their futures predetermined by the whims of men like him. As Mercy approached the wagon, the sun's heat beat down on the market square, but the air was thick with tension, a weight that seemed to hang over the entire town. Mercy's voice cut through the silence, firm and steady. "I'll take all 10. Tobias nearly choked on his tobacco. "All 10? His voice was filled with disbelief. "Ma'am, that's quite an investment. These children need feeding, proper shelter, and care. It's a lot of responsibility. They won't be easy to handle." Mercy didn't flinch. She had no intention of backing down. Her gray eyes met his, unwavering, while her hands dug into the leather pouch strapped to her waist, producing a heavy weight of silver coins that she slid across the counter with precision. "Name your price," she said, her tone as sharp as the edge of a knife. A hush fell over the crowd that had gathered. The townsfolk, curious and skeptical, watched in silence. Marshal Boone, standing off to the side, stepped forward. His badge gleamed in the sunlight, but the look in his eyes was not one of admiration. He observed Mercy with suspicion, his hand resting on the handle of his gun. "Mrs. Whitmore," the marshal began, his voice low and measured, "what exactly do you plan to do with these 10 children? Your ranch barely supports you as it is. How do you plan to care for them?" Mercy didn't flinch at the question. She stared straight into his eyes, her face stone cold, as if she had anticipated this very moment. "That's my business, Marshal." From the back of the crowd, Virgil Granger whispered loudly to his wife, "Poor things, trading one kind of misery for another. That woman's been bitter as winter since her husband passed." But Mercy heard every word. Her jaw tightened as she counted out the last of the coins, each one clinking loudly in Tobias's palm. Tobias leaned forward, eyeing the money and then Mercy. "You don't know what you're getting into," he warned. "These kids aren't just hungry, they're broken. Some of them have been through things you can't imagine." Mercy dropped the final coin into Tobias's palm. "There's your money," she said. "The children come with me now." Tobias's crooked grin revealed yellowed teeth. "Pleasure doing business, ma'am. Hope you get good work out of them before winter sets in." As Mercy began to turn, one of the children, an 8-year-old girl with tangled brown hair, stepped forward. Her small frame trembled as she approached Mercy, her eyes wide with fear. "Are you going to hurt us?" the girl asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Mercy knelt down in front of her, her expression softening for a brief moment. "What's your name, child?" "Clementine," the girl replied hesitantly. Mercy's lips curved into a faint, reassuring smile. "Well, Clementine," she said softly, her voice gentle, "I'm going to tell you something no one's probably ever told you before. You're going to be just fine." The marshal, who had been watching the exchange closely, shook his head in disgust. "Mark my words, this won't end well," he muttered to himself. "A woman alone, taking on 10 mouths to feed. She's either foolish or planning something we won't like." As Mercy led the children toward her weathered wagon, the entire town seemed to watch her every move, their disapproval palpable in the air. They thought they knew her story. They thought they understood her intentions. But Mercy Whitmore had plans that no one in this town could ever have predicted. The wagon ride, new beginnings or new chains. The wheels of Mercy's wagon creaked under the weight of the children as they traveled down the dusty road. The silence from the children was deafening. They sat huddled together, their small bodies close, but their eyes wary and unsure. Mercy could feel their fear, their distrust, but she didn't show it. This was her decision, and she was going to see it through. Clementine, the oldest of the children, spoke first, breaking the heavy silence. "Ma'am, are we going to work in the fields? Tobias said we'd be picking cotton until our fingers bled." Mercy's grip tightened on the reins, but she didn't turn around to face the child. "There's no cotton on my land, child." A small boy, his lips scarred from what looked like a long-forgotten wound, whispered, "Then what are we going to do?" Mercy's voice remained steady. "You'll see soon enough." Behind them, the dust cloud swirled as several riders approached, kicking up the dry earth. Marshal Boone galloped up alongside the wagon, his expression grim and determined. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to speak with you," Boone said, his voice filled with authority. Mercy halted the wagon, her jaw set like stone. "Marshal, the town council is concerned. 10 children is a lot for one woman to handle. We need assurance that these children will be properly cared for, not worked to the bone." Mercy's eyes met his without hesitation. "What business is it of yours how I manage my property?" Boone's voice turned stern. "These children aren't property, ma'am. They're human beings." "I'm well aware of what they are," Mercy replied coldly, her voice sharper than before. "Perhaps more aware than anyone else in this town." Virgil Granger, flanked by 3 other townsmen, rode up beside them. "Mercy, we've known you since you were a girl. This isn't like you. What's really going on here?" Mercy's face flickered for a moment. Something passed across her weathered features. Pain, maybe, or memory. But it vanished just as quickly as it appeared. She straightened her back and spoke with unwavering resolve. "What's going on is that I've made a purchase, and I'm taking my property home." Boone's hand instinctively moved toward his gun. "You're talking about children like they're livestock." The youngest child, barely 5 years old, began to cry. Clementine quickly pulled her close, whispering words of comfort. Mercy's chest tightened at the sound, but she maintained her composure. "Marshal, unless you have legal grounds to interfere, I suggest you let me pass," Mercy said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Boone glared at her for a long moment, his hand still resting on his gun. Finally, with a frustrated grunt, he wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward town, the other men following. As the wagon resumed its journey, the silence returned. Clementine, now seated closer to Mercy, spoke again, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Ma'am, why did you really buy us?" Mercy didn't answer immediately. For a long time, the only sound was the creaking of the wagon wheels and the wind whispering through the trees. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because sometimes the only way to save something is to own it first." The words hung in the air, their meaning heavy and cryptic. The children sat in silence, unsure of what was to come next. The wheels of Mercy Whitmore's wagon creaked under the heavy burden of the children as they made their way down the dusty road toward her ranch. The silence that enveloped them was deafening, broken only by the occasional clink of silver coins in her pocket. The children sat huddled together in the back of the wagon, their small eyes wide with uncertainty. Some of them were barely old enough to understand what was happening. Others, like Clementine, the oldest at around 8, seemed to understand all too well. Their faces were worn with the trauma of abandonment and hunger. Mercy's mind raced as the wheels rolled steadily forward. What had she just done? Was she rescuing these children? Or was she leading them into another form of captivity? She knew the townspeople saw her as bitter, a woman who had lost her way. They didn't know the truth, that she was simply trying to make up for the failures of the past. Her ranch, once a place of life and love, had become a symbol of loss after her husband's death. But this was something different. These children were her chance to make things right, even if no one else could understand. Clementine, breaking the silence, finally spoke in a hesitant voice. "Ma'am, are we going to work in the fields? Tobias said we'd be picking cotton until our fingers bled." Mercy's grip on the reins tightened, but she didn't turn around. "There's no cotton on my land, child. The boy with the scarred lip, a little smaller than Clementine, whispered from the back. Then what are we going to do? Mercy kept her gaze fixed forward, her voice steady. You'll see soon enough. The sun began to climb higher in the sky, casting a golden hue across the endless horizon. The landscape stretched wide and empty in every direction, save for the weathered ranch house ahead. But the silence of the land felt oppressive, as if it was holding its breath. Mercy knew it wasn't just the land that was waiting. Something about this whole town had been watching her for a long time. From behind, the sound of horses approaching broke her concentration. Several riders appeared in the distance, their figures outlined against the sky. As they came closer, one of them, a familiar face, galloped up beside her. It was Marshal Boone, his expression grim and filled with determination. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to speak with you, he said, pulling his horse up to the side of the wagon. Mercy halted the horses and waited for him to continue, her jaw clenched tight. Boone's eyes were sharp with concern. The town council is worried, Mercy. 10 children is a lot of responsibility for one woman. We need assurance that these children will be cared for properly. We don't want them worked to the bone. Mercy turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. What business is it of yours how I manage my property? Boone's tone hardened. These children are not property, ma'am. They are human beings. Mercy's eyes narrowed slightly as she met his gaze. I'm well aware of what they are, she replied coldly, perhaps more aware than anyone else in this town. Virgil Granger, flanked by 3 other townsmen, rode up to join them. His voice was gentler than Boone's, but carried a similar weight. Mercy, we've known you since you were a girl. This isn't like you. What's really going on here? Mercy's face softened for a brief moment, an emotion flickering across her features. Was it pain? Regret? It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the cold, calculated woman the town had come to know. She turned her attention back to the road ahead, her voice firm. What's going on is that I've made a purchase and I'm taking my property home. Boone's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, though he didn't draw it. You're talking about children like they're livestock, he said, his voice thick with disbelief. The youngest child, barely 5, began to sob quietly. Clementine reached out to comfort her, but Mercy's chest tightened at the sound. She could feel her heart breaking, but she wouldn't show it. Not now. Not in front of these men. Marshal, unless you have legal grounds to interfere, I suggest you let me pass, Mercy said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of a woman who had been pushed to the edge. Boone hesitated, clearly wrestling with his own doubts. The others, too, seemed uncertain. After a long moment, he finally spoke, his voice filled with frustration. I'll be checking on these children regularly. If there's any sign of mistreatment, you'll do what exactly? Mercy's eyes blazed with sudden fury. Arrest me for feeding them, for giving them shelter, for keeping them from starving in the streets? Boone had no answer for that. With a sharp grunt, he wheeled his horse around and rode off toward town, the others following him reluctantly. Mercy's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't allow herself to relax. As the wagon started up again, Clementine slid closer to the front, her voice hesitant. Ma'am, why did you really buy us? She asked softly. Mercy didn't answer right away. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke, her voice barely audible. Because sometimes the only way to save something is to own it first. Clementine didn't fully understand, but she nodded silently, unsure of what to say. The other children, though quiet, seemed to sense that something had changed. They were no longer merely property to be sold, no longer simply objects of pity. They were hers now, and that meant something, at least that's what Mercy hoped. As the wagon neared the ranch house, the children's eyes widened. The house was weathered, its paint peeling in places, and several shutters hung crooked on their hinges. But it wasn't the house that struck them. It was the silence, the heavy stillness that seemed to permeate the air, as if the land itself had been waiting for them. Mercy climbed down from the wagon with a mechanical precision. "Everyone out, single file," she ordered, her voice leaving no room for debate. The children shuffled out, their bare feet hitting the hard-packed earth with soft thuds. They instinctively clustered together, standing small and vulnerable in the vast emptiness of the land. Mercy led them toward a large wooden building behind the main house. Clementine fell into step beside her, a curious expression on her face. "Is that where we'll sleep?" Mercy didn't answer at first, but as they reached the building, she opened the heavy door, revealing something that took the children by surprise. Instead of the cramped, dirty quarters they had expected, the building was immaculate. Rows of small beds were arranged neatly, each one topped with clean blankets and a pillow. Wooden chests sat at the foot of each bed, and warm afternoon light streamed through the glass windows. "I don't understand," whispered one of the younger boys, his voice filled with confusion. "This looks like a home." Clementine finished the thought aloud. It's a home." Mercy's expression remained unreadable. "Don't get too comfortable. There are rules here, and they will be followed without question." She pointed to a schedule written in neat handwriting on a wooden board. "Wake at dawn, breakfast at 6. Work begins at 7 and continues until 6 in the evening. Supper at 7, lights out at 8. No talking after dark. No leaving the property without permission. No questions about what happened here before you arrived." The youngest girl raised her trembling hand. "What kind of work?" Mercy's eyes grew distant as she looked out the window, as if seeing something the children couldn't. "The kind that needs doing." A shadow passed across the doorway, and the children turned to see a tall, thin man watching them with cold calculation. His clothes were fine, but travel-worn, and there was something predatory in his smile. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said smoothly, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "I heard about your recent purchase." Mercy's entire body tensed. "Mr. Blackwood, I wasn't expecting you." "Oh, but I always keep track of interesting developments in this territory," he said with a sly grin, his gaze sweeping over the children like a hawk evaluating its prey. 10 healthy workers. That should speed up production considerably." Clementine felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications of his words. These children weren't here for a fresh start. They were here to work, and Mercy was the one who had agreed to it. Mercy's voice was firm, but the children could hear the strain in it. "The children need rest. It's been a long day." Blackwood chuckled, but there was no warmth in his laugh. "Of course, rest up, little ones. Tomorrow the real work begins." As he walked away, his boots echoing ominously on the wooden floor, Clementine caught Mercy's eye. For just a brief instant, she saw something in her face that looked almost like fear. But fear of what? And what kind of work would it be?